In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the reactions to the raising of Lazarus. And what we're going to see are there's four different reactions from people to the one sign that was performed. Especially in an election year, there's no shortage of opinionated journalism. Right? Many stations really become unwatchable. And it's interesting to switch back and forth between these types of stations. Right? An event can happen during the day and both sides will have huge stories about it, but what they say could not be any different. One side will say that this is a great victory for the American people, while the other side is declaring a constitutional crisis and our very existence as a country is now teetering on the brink. They're both covering the same event, but they could not be any different in what they're saying about it. And in part because they're bringing their prejudices to the table, right? If Jesus had not said, Lazarus, come forth, everyone from every grave would have risen. But even though this is such a significant miracle, such a significant sign, it's hard to imagine that there could be so many different reactions to the same event. But time and time again in John's Gospel, we have vastly different reactions to the signs that Jesus performed. Right? Even with the significant sign of Jesus raising Lazarus, raising him from being 4 days dead, even that one sign results in vastly different reactions. And where we had left off in the last lesson was Jesus was calling Lazarus from the tomb. And he had thanked the Father for answering his prayers. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to him, loose him and let him go. And he who died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with the cloth. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things that Jesus did believed in him. Remember last week, in the last lesson, we saw that Bethany was just outside of Jerusalem. And many of the Jews had come to comfort Mary and Martha. So these are those Jews, right? The ones who were there weeping with them at the gravesite. And this is the first of the reactions. What it says is that many of them believed. And this is great, right? What was the purpose of these signs? So that we believe. And as a result of this, right, we see that these people believe. But that always does not pan out. Remember when Jesus fed the 5,000 in John chapter 6? Did they believe? Yes, right? What did they want to do? They wanted to make him king even if they had to force him to do so, right? How many believed, though, and were following him by the end of the day? Right? Only the 12. And we saw from the very, very beginning, all the way in John chapter 2, right, when Jesus was in Jerusalem at the Passover, that many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus was unwilling to commit himself to them because he knew all men and had no need that they should testify in man, for he knew what was in man. Right? It says that these people believed, but Jesus knew that does not always mean that things are going to work out well. Remember the purpose of John's gospel, right? The purpose of these signs are so that we believe, right? So that we believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. But so many times we see that people believe, but it's not accomplishing what the intent was. The intent is that they believe and can have life. So what makes that difference in believing and having life versus believing and not having life? And it really comes down to, what are they truly believing in? Are they believing in signs just for the sake of signs? Or are they believing in signs because they lead them to Jesus and who he truly is? And those are two different things. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves, what do we believe in? Right? It's not a dogma like Martha. I know that he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day. Right? The real question is, do we trust Jesus? Right? Jesus said to Martha, he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Right? Do we trust Jesus? Do we believe that he is the good shepherd? And if not, then our belief is not going to lead to life, right? In John, it seems like as many bad things as good things happen when people believe. And it's interesting, the word that is used here. Many. Many of the Jews saw this event and believed. Jesus had just raised somebody who had been dead for 4 days, and only many of them believed. So there are some then that don't, right? But some of them, some of the very people that just saw Lazarus being raised, went away to the Pharisees and told them the things that Jesus did. Then the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered counsel and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs, and if we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Right? So this is the second group of people. Opposite of believers, right, is unbelief or disbelief, right? It's not that they don't believe the signs, right? What shall we do, for this man works many signs? They believe the signs. They believe that Jesus can make a lame man walk. They believe that Jesus can cause a blind man to see. They believe that Jesus just raised Lazarus from being dead after 4 days. The issue is they don't believe in Jesus. And they don't believe despite the fact that there is so much evidence. Well, how can that be? And one of the things we see is belief is an intellectual act, but it's also an act of the will, right? Have you ever seen nurses or doctors at a hospital? Right? They work at a hospital and then they go outside and smoke. Right? Despite there being so much evidence, right? Person can choose to ignore what they know is best for them. They can choose to follow, or they can choose to disbelieve despite all of the evidence. So why would these people choose not to believe in this case? And what we see is self-preservation. Right? The chief priest and the Pharisees gathered counsel and says, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Well, what place are they talking about? The temple. Right? In Acts chapter 6, right, Stephen is talking, and it says that they set up false witnesses who said, "This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against this holy place." The temple. What was one of the things they had accused Jesus of, saying, right, that if they tore it down, he would tear it down. This holy place and the law. The Jews are concerned about this place, the temple, and the nation of Israel itself. What they assume is that Jesus is growing in popularity, and if this keeps up, the people will revolt, right? And they will try and declare Jesus as their king. Any reason why we might think that they might happen? Isn't that exactly what happened in John chapter 6? So if the people declare that they have a new king, and the Romans hear about it, they won't care about who's Jesus's people versus non-Jesus people, right? They're going to come in and they're going to destroy the temple. They will destroy our nation, and we will all be ruined. Their motivation is self-preservation. Why choose to believe? Because if I choose to believe something and accept it, it means I have to give up something that I don't want to do. And that means these people are never going to believe because they're more focused on doing what they want to do than giving it up and doing something different and following Jesus. And in Luke chapter 16, there was a man named Lazarus and a rich man that had died. The rich man was worried about his 5 brothers. And the rich man begged that Lazarus be sent back to warn them. And Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets." But he said to them, "If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rise from the dead." These religious leaders chose not to listen to Jesus if they choose not to believe Moses and the prophets. It would not matter how many Lazaruses Jesus would raise up. They would choose to disbelieve, because surrendering to him would mean giving up their status. And that is something that was more important to them. So one of them, Caiaphas, being high priest that year. So Rome would regularly swap out the high priest. It was a way of keeping control over the people. In fact, 3 high priests before Caiaphas were turned out very quickly. So the Romans made Caiaphas high priest about 15 years before this. Now, unlike his predecessors, Caiaphas had figured out how to hold on to power for 15 years. So if there was an expert in self-preservation, Caiaphas is that person. So Caiaphas said to them, basically, "You're a bunch of dummies, right? You don't know what you're doing." He says, "You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not the whole nation should perish." He says, "You're all getting concerned. This is what we're going to do. We're going to kill him. And if we kill him, that will solve everything. The people won't declare him king. Rome will not have a reason to step in, and it will all be okay." He says, "You guys don't know what you're doing. You're not looking at this the right way." Now, this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Caiaphas was speaking truer words than he realized himself. This is exactly what Jesus had said when he was in Jerusalem before. In John chapter 10, he said, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep." Right? The good shepherd dies so that his flock may live. But it was bigger than what Caiaphas even was speaking of. Right? And not for that nation only, but also that he would gather in one the children of God who were scattered and abroad. Right? Jesus would gather together the scattered sheep, those not of the fold of Jerusalem, and they will hear his voice, and as a result of that, they will follow him. But these people are more focused on self-preservation, and they will not see that, and they will not listen to the voice. Now, from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Right? Caiaphas is convinced that if they put Jesus to death, then it would stop Rome from destroying their temple or wiping out their nation. But that's not exactly how it turned out. In fact, what we see is in AD 70, Rome indeed does come in and destroys their place, destroys the temple, so much so that not one stone was left on top of another. And the nation was destroyed. The people were dispersed. The lineages were destroyed so that there would be no way to prove who came from what tribe, thus ending the priesthood lineage. They lost it all. Right? If you reject Jesus to save your life, not only do you lose Jesus, but one day you will lose it all. And they thought they wouldn't have to sacrifice anything by disbelieving Jesus. And what they found out was they lost everything. But to those that believe in Jesus, he gives life, and he gives life abundantly. Therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but he went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there he remained with his disciples. So Jesus and his disciples would go off into the wilderness. This was about 13 miles outside of Jerusalem, right? But the rest of Israel was up to something else. The Passover. The Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. The Passover was at hand, the final Passover for Jesus, and the people would begin to come in early to purify themselves. And in Numbers 9:10 it says that you could observe the Passover, but not if you were unclean. So people would come early to do purification rituals so that they would be ready to observe the Passover. But Jesus does not need to go early for purification. Why? Because he has nothing to be purified from. But these people do. So they are coming into Jerusalem, and what we see is they are curious. And they sought Jesus. And they spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come to the feast?" Right? Well, why would they wonder whether or not he would come? Because they had heard about the orders that had been given by the chief priests. The chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, that they should report it so that they might seize him. Right? The leaders had sought to kill Jesus before, but these were spontaneous events. Now they had issued a command. If anyone knows where Jesus is, they are to notify the authorities so that they can come and that they can seize him. So they're curious. Will Jesus return? Is he even coming? They're curious, and what we remember, they were curious before. Remember John chapter 7, the Feast of Booths. Therefore many from the crowd, when they heard this saying, said, "Truly this is the prophet." And others said, "This is the Christ." And some said, "Will the Christ come out of Galilee?" Right? They were curious then. Could this be the Christ? Except the Christ is supposed to come from Bethlehem, and we know that this man came from Galilee. Well, the problem was they didn't understand everything about Jesus. So if you're staying curious, because your understanding of Jesus is not what you had preconceived in your mind, right? Your preconceived version of who Jesus is, you need to ask yourself, right? You need to find out more. You need to understand. Right? The little baby version of Jesus, right? That's maybe the version of Jesus that you like. But when Jesus says, "Unless you believe I am he, you will die in your sins," Those two versions of Jesus aren't necessarily going to match up. And these people are curious and they're wondering, is Jesus going to show up? Right? In a couple of days, what we're going to see is they will be yelling, "Crucify him." So what we've seen reactions so far is belief. There are some who believe. There are some that even though they know that the signs are true, that they disbelieve in Jesus and will continue to resist him. And we see those who are curious. They have a curiosity about him. Then, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus, who had been dead, and whom he had raised from the dead. And there they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of the ones who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. So a couple of things we see here. This is not the first time we've seen Mary at the feet of Jesus. John chapter 11, Jesus had came to Mary, and we saw she fell at his feet weeping over Lazarus. And now she comes out with an expensive bottle of oil, used to make ointment and perfume. Spikenard is an essential oil which was imported from plants in India. So how expensive? 300 denarii is roughly a day's wage. So this is 300 days' wages. 52 Sabbaths, if you count those in, what you're literally looking at is an entire year of salary working 6 days a week. And this is what she pours out. And she comes to Jesus with this expensive jar of oil, a year's worth of work to purchase this, and she pours it on his feet and begins wiping them. Not with towels, but with her hair to clean them off. Remember chapter 11, the concern was the stench of dead bodies filling the air. And now the house is filled with the smell of perfume because Jesus is there. Why would she do this? It doesn't say, but it's obvious. She's doing it because she loves Jesus. Remember chapter 11, what was pointed out. Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Jesus waited 2 days because he loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Jesus now is right next to Jerusalem when the Jews wanted to kill him because he loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And this is an act of love, right? Looking back, Jesus had just raised her brother from the dead. Looking forward, is this the last time we see feet being washed in the book of John? No. Next time we'll see is Jesus washing the feet. Who should have been washing the feet? The apostles. Mary is way ahead of where the apostles are in understanding what love looks like. And she's not washing with a towel to clean, right? To clean his feet like a servant would, but instead she's using her own hair, sacrificing a year's worth of wages in an act of love. But not all of them were like Mary. One of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" And this he said not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and he had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. So 2 things John is telling us about Judas here. One is he would betray him, and the other was he was a thief. He did not care about the poor. He cared about himself, and he would steal money away from their traveling funds. He was not afraid to sin for money. But Jesus said, "Let her alone. She has kept this day for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." So a couple of points. Jesus is not saying you don't have to care for the poor. In fact, he is quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 15. For the poor will never cease from the land. Or he says they will be with you always. And the very next sentence that follows, therefore I command you, saying, you shall open your hand wide to your brother, to your poor and your needy, and in your land. Jesus is saying, God is saying, you will always have the poor. Do not withhold from helping them out. In verse 9, he says that if you do so, then your heart is wicked. So if you think not caring for the poor is what Jesus is saying, you're missing the point of this quote. Right? He says you always have this obligation, but sometimes you have to do things when the opportunity arises. Remember at the well with the Samaritans, right? And their concern was, have you eaten? And what he said was, I have other food. The fields are white with harvest. And when the disciples ask him, why go to Bethany? They will kill you. Jesus said, when it is day, I must work. The night is coming when I can't. Jesus is saying, you will always have the poor. But Jesus says, Mary has done this in preparation for my burial. Mary knows Jesus is about to die. Now, she doesn't know why. Jesus has said, when you lift me up, you will know that I am he. Right? The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. They're only 2 miles away from the temple, and the command has been given to seize Jesus so that they can kill him. And she's probably heard the disciples talk about how they might die as well. Once again, Mary sees things more than even the apostles did. And Jesus says, you leave her alone. She believes Jesus is the resurrection and the life, and he deserves all the love that she can show. But others don't. Now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. Jesus had just raised Lazarus from being 4 days dead and brought him back to life. And the Jews think the solution is to kill him. Right? Do you think if Jesus had done it once, he could do it again? Right? When you decide not to love Jesus, it shows just the ridiculous and futile lengths that people will go to try to resist him, to try to just make him go away, to get rid of the things that remind them of him. So what do you do with this sign? Right? Hopefully you believe. But if you disbelieve, you need to realize the tragic mistake that you're making. And if you're curious, but you can't commit, make sure you understand everything about Jesus, that you don't have any misconceptions. And if you believe in him, then you realize he is worth all of the love and sacrifice you can offer.